I will leave my questions for the moment, but I think your presentation really offers a lot of. It says the Chinese nuclear deterrence is something that probably needs to be studied more and more, if only because it's a growing arsenal in capacities at least, and making it indeed a global player in many ways. So we are now going to turn to Alexey Arbatov. Alexey Arbatov is a scholar in residence at the Carnegie Center for Non-Proliferation Program, and was formerly a member of the State Duma, vice chairman of the Russian United Democratic Party, Yabloko, and deputy chairman of the Duma Defense Committee. Alexey is also a member of the Russian Academy of Science and leads the Academy Center for International Security at the Institute of World Economy and International Relations, where he was once a department head and research fellow. I will not quote all the boards Alexey sits on. It's right there. We're very, very happy to have Alexey discussing the Russian perspective on complex deterrence.
Well, I am very happy to be here, and I want to express my gratitude for organizers of this conference for inviting me. I have to make one reservation in the beginning. In the program, my presentation is entitled Russian Perspective. And it is true, it is a Russian perspective, but it's a perspective of only one Russian. That's me. In many respects, I disagree with the Russian government position. In some respects, I agree. So you have to keep that in mind. Nuclear deterrence is a very theoretical notion. I believe that nuclear deterrence is invention of political scientists of the early 50s, which was after that adopted by politicians and state leaders, and after that by military strategists. But in fact, during 70 years of the history of nuclear weapons, not a single nuclear weapon was developed and procured for the purpose of deterrence. They were always developed and procured for very particular military purposes, for destroying particular targets or for destroying them with particular effects of nuclear weapons in various combinations of operational planning of nuclear attacks. I know only one exception from this rule, and that exception is Nikita Khrushchev, mother of Kuzma, huge bomb, 58 megatons, that was exploded in 1961 in order to deter the West. That was a time of very acute crisis between Russia, Soviet Union, and the West. And that explosion was designed to deter, because this bomb was never produced and deployed. No bomber could accommodate this huge weapon, to say nothing of ballistic missiles. You can see this bomb now, the makeup of this bomb displayed at the Museum of Nuclear Weapons at the nuclear laboratory in Sarov. It was never introduced into armed forces. Otherwise, nuclear weapons were always made for war fighting, not for deterrent. Politicians were saying that they are for deterrence. And this is the fundamental paradox of nuclear weapons. Theoretically, they all are for deterrence. Practically, they all are for war fighting. And this paradox leads to some very dangerous consequences, because some plans of war fighting make the use of nuclear weapons more possible. For instance, there is a concept of launch on warning of ballistic missiles in order for those ballistic missiles to survive in case of the opponent's disarming first strike. This is to perform certain military tasks. This is allegedly to strengthen deterrence. But in a crisis situation, this is a recipe for disaster because launch and warning creates a danger of inadvertent nuclear war or nuclear war by false alarm or by strategic miscalculation. Also, there are a lot of operational plans of first use of nuclear weapons. For instance, tactical nuclear weapons are usually designed for first use in case of large-scale conventional war, which makes those weapons much more easy to employ and much more difficult to control, especially much more difficult to control by national political authorities. Presently, all nuclear weapon states, and we have 9 nuclear weapon states, all of them, except Israel, proclaim that their nuclear weapons are for deterrence. With Israel, it's the same case, but Israel does not acknowledge possession of nuclear weapons. That is why I singled out Israel. But actually, all of them have nuclear weapons theoretically for deterrence. But all of them, except China, have plans of first use of nuclear weapons or first strike with nuclear weapons. With China, it's the only country which unequivocally declared that its strategy is purely second strike, that it will never be the first to use nuclear weapons. But a lot of experts, myself included, have a lot of doubts about validity of this commitment. Most probably this is a purely rhetorical political commitment like that of the Soviet Union in 1982 when it declared no first use of nuclear weapons, but nobody believed that. Most probably Chinese operational strategy envisions preemptive strike with nuclear weapons in time of crisis and imminent war. Because, as my colleagues have already said here, their visible nuclear weapons are not capable of surviving nuclear strike by either United States or Russia. That means that they are not very good for a second strike. But if China still has them, probably it plans to bring them to high readiness and use it preemptively if necessary in case of a very acute crisis. That is why nuclear deterrence contains the seeds of its own failure. Since nuclear warfighting is the actual work of nuclear weapons, actual task of nuclear weapons. Certainly, this danger will be greatly exacerbated with further proliferation of nuclear weapons, especially among unstable extremist regimes, to say nothing of international terrorists. So, saying that about nuclear deterrence, which I think is a dangerous thing, I agree with Patricia Lewis, who said in the first part of the conference that as long as nuclear weapons stay with us, the danger of their use will stay and will increase with further proliferation of nuclear weapons. However, I respectfully disagree with her that the way to deal with that is through sweeping agreements like on Global Zero or Nuclear Prohibition Convention. I just do not believe that this may work. And this reminds me of a joke about Soviet times. Those of you who lived in the Soviet Union remember collective farms, kolkhozes. And so the joke is about a meeting of the collective farm in which they have two items on discussion. Item number 1, construction of cow barn. Item number 2, construction of communism. So after a lot of debate, the resolution of this session was, for lack of timber and nails, proceed directly to the second point. So I think that if we have now great difficulties in moving towards, we start negotiations with other nuclear disarmament negotiations, it's an illusion that we can cut the corner and overcome those difficulties, bringing about a sweeping, exciting, overwhelming convention like global zero by a particular date, or like prohibition of nuclear weapons. I think the way is to proceed along the way in which we were proceeding before that, but to try much harder. During the last 2 decades, after the end of the Cold War, the nuclear arsenals decreased dramatically by 80 to 90%. I will show you the first picture, which is, this is only the picture which depicts strategic nuclear weapons reduction after the end of Cold War. And you can see that it is very steep. Black United States, red Russia. That's how they were reduced. I will come later back to this picture to illustrate another point. However, even now, the aggregate power of remaining nuclear arsenals of 9 nuclear weapon states is about 70,000 Hiroshima bombs. And the number of those weapons is around 10,000. That's the expert assessments differ, but it's as much as that. More than 90% of these remaining arsenals still belong to United States and Russia. Now, a few more words about nuclear deterrence. In contemporary conditions, I think that the nuclear deterrence has a number of paradoxes. First of all, they remain in the hands of great powers effective way of dealing with the threat that no longer exists. I cannot imagine a situation under which 5 nuclear weapon states would imagine nuclear or massive conventional attack against each other. Not necessarily because of nuclear deterrence, but because of other consequences, because of globalization, because they're connected in many ways, economically and informationally in many other ways. So enormous resources are being spent for the task which is not necessarily relevant. The situation of other nuclear weapon states is different. In particular, the situation of Israel is different. I believe that unacknowledged nuclear arsenal of Israel is directly related to its security, not to status, because Israel doesn't acknowledge that, not to any other purposes, but to its physical security. But this is not the case with other nuclear weapon states. At the same time, nuclear deterrence is impotent in dealing with new threats of the 21st century. First of all, proliferation of nuclear weapons. I would say, on the contrary, nuclear deterrence encourages proliferation of nuclear weapons. It cannot deal with international terrorism. It cannot deal with international nuclear terrorism. If ever, God forbid, terrorists acquire nuclear weapons, nuclear deterrence will not work against them. That's clear. And they are not effective against many other threats which we are facing, drugs, trans-border crime, and so on and so forth. Second paradox of nuclear deterrence is that the continuing existence of nuclear deterrence among great powers, in particular Russia and the United States, is an obstacle for their much deeper and broader cooperation to address international security issues, proliferation, terrorism, and many others. For instance, the ballistic missile defense program has become an obstacle to arms control and major irritant in Russian-American strategic relations, especially and particularly against the background of remaining nuclear mutual deterrence relationship between them. If it were not for mutual nuclear deterrence relationship, Russia would not worry about American ballistic missile defense. The third point is that the proliferation of nuclear weapons does not generate strategic stability at regional levels. This question was addressed in the first part of our session. I will not elaborate on it, but clearly between countries which are like India, Pakistan, or for this case, North Korea and its neighbors, the nuclear deterrence, stable nuclear deterrence that existed for many decades between Russia and the United States will not be reproduced at the regional level. And the use of nuclear weapons is much more probable at the regional level, in particular between India and Pakistan, which have a mutual deterrence relationship between them. There is a lot of debate about interaction between nuclear disarmament and nuclear non-proliferation. A big school of thought claims that nuclear proliferation does not depend on nuclear disarmament, because those countries that want to acquire nuclear weapons are not taking example of nuclear weapon states. They have their particular ideas and purposes when they consider decision of developing nuclear weapon. For instance, Iranian nuclear weapon program is not related to nuclear weapons of other existing nuclear weapon states. It's directed for something very different. In the foreseeable future, the forecast is for great expansion of nuclear power, of nuclear energy. And this makes the whole non-proliferation regime much more fragile. The main paradox of non-proliferation regime and the Treaty on Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons is like that. It was designed with the concept that the benefits of peaceful nuclear energy would be incentive for other states to refrain from acquiring nuclear weapons. And actually it's in the treaty that those states, members of the treaty, that commit themselves not to acquire nuclear weapons will be blessed with the benefits of peaceful nuclear energy, and nuclear states will help them in this. However, now we see something very different. Peaceful nuclear energy programs are the way for non-nuclear weapon states to acquire nuclear weapons. North Korea was the first example, Iran is the second example, and if Iran sometimes acquires nuclear weapons, many other countries in Asia, Latin America will follow this example. So my conclusion is that there is a relationship between nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. There is such. I disagree with those that say there is no relationship. Look at the dynamics of aggregate nuclear weapons by number of weapons. Since 1945, you will see that nuclear proliferation was quite fast during the time of build-up of nuclear arsenals in the world. There is one reservation to be made about non-proliferation treaty. 5 nuclear weapon states, United States, Soviet Union, France, Britain, and China, were very smart. They said, we signed non-proliferation treaty in 1968. So our nuclear weapons are okay, but any other state which decides to acquire a nuclear weapon is a proliferator of nuclear weapons. Certainly, this is not something to which other states would agree. And every review session of non-proliferation treaty is a place of debates when those other states blame nuclear weapon states for their allegedly right to have nuclear weapons to be legitimate states. However, if we consider nuclear proliferation not in this very tricky way, but in a normal way, when additional states acquire nuclear weapons, you will see by this chart that starting with the United States, proliferation was quite quick till about the beginning of the 90s. Then, when real nuclear disarmament started, proliferation slowed down, and South Africa got rid of nuclear weapons. You see that. You see it. You can see that here. So with deep nuclear disarmament, South Africa got rid of nuclear weapons. Then, for other reasons, it continued, but at much slower pace, even taking into account India, Pakistan, and North Korea. So my conclusion to that is that relationship between nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation is like a semiconductor. With nuclear disarmament, you have to apply serious efforts to strengthen non-proliferation. Nuclear disarmament in and of itself is not enough to stop proliferation of nuclear weapons. You have to do a lot of other things to achieve non-proliferation. But without nuclear disarmament, whatever you do will be useless and fruitless. Because if there is no nuclear disarmament, proliferation will continue and you will not be able to stop it. And the history confirms it. During the times of arms race, proliferation was quite intensive. During the 90s, end of the 80s and 90s, when we had the greatest breakthroughs in nuclear disarmament, the non-proliferation regime was greatly enhanced. 40 states joined it, including France and China. The Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1995 was made indefinite treaty, indefinite duration treaty. There was additional protocol, very important subject. I will not elaborate on that. In 1997, 9 states were deprived of nuclear weapons. Some of them did it voluntarily, like South Africa and some others. Others were deprived of nuclear weapons by military force, like Iraq. So it was golden age of disarmament, and it was golden age of non-proliferation. Then the next period, under Bush administration, deadlock in disarmament and disintegration of non-proliferation regime. North Korea became nuclear weapon state, and Iran accelerated its programs. After that, a short period of reset between Russia and the United States, the New START Treaty, and moderate success in non-proliferation with the Non-Proliferation Review Conference in 1910. Now we have deadlock again and new difficulties for non-proliferation regime. If we do not overcome this deadlock, I doubt that we will have a successful NPT review conference in 2015. Now about the central nuclear disarmament. For many decades, for 40 years, the Soviet Union and the United States, Russia and the United States had arms control negotiations which were based on several important premises, which were initially formulated by US Defense Secretary Robert McNamara. Stringent limitation on ballistic missile defenses, ignoring non-strategic nuclear weapons, that's tactical nuclear weapons, ignoring conventional weapons which may affect strategic balance, like air defense systems or anti-submarine warfare systems, and ignoring nuclear weapons of other states. Since the Soviet Union and the United States accumulated enormous arsenals that worked for a long time, and I return here to this first graph. You can see here the arms control treaties, which are in blocks, and the reduction of actual nuclear arsenals. And almost physically, you see that each successive treaty reduced nuclear weapons by smaller and smaller and smaller margin. It's like compressing water. The more you compress, the more it resists it. Why? Well, first of all, because initially we did away with enormous surplus of nuclear weapons accumulating during the Cold War. So reduction was quite steep. But then other factors started to come into play. First of all, ballistic missile defenses and precision-guided conventional systems. So probably the New START is the last treaty that was concluded on the basis of those initial conditions that were formulated in the end of the 60s by Robert McNamara. New treaties, if we are to achieve them, will be based on different assumptions. Moreover, the the chance of achieving next treaty depends much more not on strategic weapons per se, which are in possession of Russia and the United States, but with our ability to deal with intervening systems which never belonged to strategic arms agenda. Well, first of all, ballistic missile defenses. I will not elaborate on that. We failed in our attempt to work out the cooperation between Russia and the United States in developing ballistic missile defenses. So now, what is the situation now? United States and American allies are developing ballistic missile defense. Russia is developing its own missile defense. It's both air defense and missile defense. It's called airspace defense. So we are developing our own systems. However, American ballistic missile defense, in contrast to Russian official position, will not be able in any way to affect Russian nuclear deterrence. Likewise, Russian airspace defense will not be able to affect American deterrence. Those systems will only be able of intercepting very limited missile strikes, basically strikes that could be delivered by rogue states, about which Mark Fitzpatrick told us today. However, if the crisis over Ukraine is de-escalated and we reach some accommodation on this question, I think we will return to this point and maybe achieve a breakthrough. But it will not be based on McNamara principle, that is stringent limitation of ballistic missile defense. We will have to work out a formula under which quite broad deployment of ballistic missile defenses is permitted, but norms and technical characteristics will be formulated, elaborated, which will distinguish defense against rogue states from defense against each other, so that deployment of ballistic missile defense strengthens our security against rogue states, but does not undercut our cooperation on security questions and our ability to proceed with further nuclear arms reductions. With respect to precision-guided systems, at present, ballistic missile defense is not the first point of concern of Russian officials, Russian government. It's precision-guided strategic systems of the United States which have moved to the foreground of Russian concerns. In particular, those which are being developed under the so-called concept of prompt global strike. Ballistic missile goes above the atmosphere. After that, it dives into the atmosphere and proceeds with aerodynamic re-entry vehicle, which is precision-guided, conventional, and can hit a target. So this is a major concern of Russian government, and on this I also have to disagree with some of my colleagues. I think that broad introduction of such systems will not make deterrence more robust, will undercut deterrence and greatly hamper strategic arms control. We may theoretically argue about that endlessly, but the practice is a good criteria. Already now, in response to American prompt global strike systems, which will enter armed forces only in 10 years or 15 years, Russia is developing and deploying 6 nuclear missile programs. It's deploying its own version of prompt global strike system, and it's deploying airspace defense, of which I already mentioned. This is the effect of such systems. Of course, they will be introduced. There is no way to stop them. But also, for negotiators, it will be very important to work out limitations that will permit those systems, but will not create a threat or illusion of threat of capability of delivering disarming first strike with conventional precision-guided systems, so-called ecologically clean disarming strike, because that will accelerate arms race and bring negotiations to a deadlock. There is a precedent in the New START, ballistic missiles limited under New START are limited regardless of their warhead, whether it's nuclear or conventional. It doesn't make a difference. And this, I think, is an important point about this treaty, which is not very broadly acknowledged. However, in the future, we will have to move further than that and cover those prompt global strike systems that are called boost glide systems, which I mentioned, also cover them by certain limitations. Well, my last point, I don't think I have much time left. Maybe I don't have any time left. But my last point is about other nuclear weapon states, multilateral nuclear disarmament. Everybody recognizes that multilateral nuclear disarmament is a good idea. Russia and the United States cannot proceed forever in a bilateral format. Other 7 nuclear weapon states have to join. In particular, China. With China, the problem is that in contrast to all other nuclear weapon states, it has enormous industrial capacity for build-up of nuclear weapons, but it's completely opaque about its nuclear arsenal. There is great suspicion that what we see in China is only on the surface, but China is building huge underground tunnels, giving no explanation for those tunnels, in which hundreds of ground mobile, medium range and intercontinental range ballistic missiles may be hidden. When we are talking to Chinese friends, comrades, and saying, when will you join Russia and America in nuclear disarmament? They say, we will join you when you get down closer to our level. And we ask them, what is this level? And they say, this is a secret. More or less the same with other nuclear weapon states, of course not with Great Britain and France, which are completely open about nuclear weapons, but they also say that they may join sometime in the future when Russia and the United States get down to their level. Well, this is like a vicious circle. I think that's a vicious circle because it's a very artificial construction. I do not believe that multilateral nuclear disarmament may be based on the principle of join the bandwagon or welcome to the club, because all other nuclear weapon states have their own deterrence considerations, have their own situations. You have to address those, not to invent artificial schemes, 5 plus 4 or 3 plus 2. This will never work in practice. Well, first of all, if you compare all nuclear weapons which are in possession of 2 great powers and all others, you will see that there is still a great discrepancy. Our leaders, in particular Russian leader, tends to compare Russian strategic forces with the aggregate number of all other nuclear weapon states. Well, first of all, they never agree to be put in the aggregates. They all are individual nuclear weapon states with their individual strategies and security concerns. Secondly, if you compare their nuclear weapon states, you have compared them to all nuclear weapons of Russia and the United States. And here you see still the asymmetry is very big. The only concern and uncertainty is connected with China, as you can see on this picture, because China may have much more than we see on the surface, their missiles and submarines. They can have much more nuclear weapons in their tunnels. Still, another complication is not just asymmetry. It's that it turns out that nuclear deterrence is an exception rather than a rule in strategic relationships of 9 nuclear weapon states. And I will show the last chart. It's a little bit complicated at first glance, but I will explain it to you. We sometimes call it a nuclear championship because it's like the football teams, you know. Well, what this chart depicts is that if you take nuclear weapon states, you will find out that very few of them have mutual nuclear deterrence. For instance, Israel and North Korea do not have nuclear deterrence. Israel and India do not have nuclear deterrence. France and Britain do not have mutual nuclear deterrence. France, Britain, and the United States do not have nuclear deterrence. Pakistan and China do not have nuclear deterrence. It's not clear whether Russia and China have nuclear deterrence. President Putin is now in Beijing. Probably they will do away with nuclear deterrence, sign some declaration. But it's a murky question whether China and Russia have nuclear deterrence. That means that their joining negotiations is a very different than just negotiating among themselves on certain quotas or certain levels. I do not think that there is some ground for negotiations between France and Britain about nuclear weapons limitations. They are allies. There is no reason they should negotiate that. The same goes with France, Britain, and the United States. They are allies. The nuclear weapons complement each other, if indirectly. They are not competing with each other. So France cannot say, I will limit this weapon if you Brits limit this weapon. This will not work. The experience of arms control of Russia and the United States shows that negotiations and real agreements, real reductions, and I showed you that there were very real, deep reductions, are possible if there is mutual deterrence relationship, which means that there is a possibility of trade-off. I reduce in order for you to reduce. And secondly, if their forces are more or less equal, comparable at least, if they're very asymmetric, it would be very difficult to reach some agreement because inferior side would not agree to legitimize its inferiority. For instance, it's very difficult to imagine nuclear arms control between China and the United States because the United States are so superior. It's difficult to imagine nuclear arms control between Russia and France because Russia is so superior. Some other models may be applicable, but not a simple one. Probably, if we ever see multilateral nuclear disarmament, it will be a number of additional forums at which states would negotiate among themselves in case when they have mutual deterrence and more or less symmetric. And it turns out that except Russia and the United States, there are only 2 other states among the 9 who have that kind of relationship. That's India and Pakistan. They have nuclear deterrence relationship and they are more or less equal in their arsenals. Political tensions, a lot of emotional things intervene, prevent them from having real negotiations. But from the point of view of arms control, they are a classic case like United States and Russia for having such negotiations. Other negotiations certainly would be much more difficult, but not impossible. Israel and North Korea, it's impossible to bring them into negotiations on nuclear arms control on the basis of classic model. Their joining nuclear disarmament will be dependent on regional security situation, limits on conventional forces, resolution of many political, territorial, and other issues, and it's more an issue of non-proliferation rather than nuclear arms control. Well, I'm finishing my report saying that mutual nuclear deterrence, unfortunately, most probably will remain as an important element of strategic relationship of great powers, in particular Russia and the United States and other nuclear weapon states, if they are not allies and if they are within reach of each other's nuclear weapons. However, expansion of ballistic missile defenses, which are non-nuclear, and expansion of offensive strategic conventional systems, which are also non-nuclear, which will gradually decrease the role the nuclear weapons play in the strategic relationship among nuclear weapon states. If this goes unchecked, expansion of ballistic missile defenses and precision-guided conventional systems may seriously undercut security and destroy, disintegrate arms control system. That is why what we need is innovative arms control models and ways to deal with that, to accommodate ballistic missile defenses, to accommodate precision-guided systems into strategic stability so that they do not undercut international security. Whether it's possible or not is a philosophical question. It depends on how much we try, how clever we are, how smart we are to invent such formulas. The same relates, of course, to global zero and to final nuclear disarmament. There is no recipe and no certain forecast. I will finish only by giving you a formula of a great statesman who lived 1500 years ago, was great statesman and philosopher and writer, Anicius Boeotius, who was sometimes called the last Roman. In his treatise on Trinity, he wrote, "As much as you are able, join faith to reason." Thank you.